do a project. We want you to write a book on the first 15 years of the Vikings. And we want you to write the book, and then we want you to go sell the book. And
Wow.
I'm 22 years old. Okay, well, I can write. I don't know if I can sell. And so, but I called Twin City Federal, was one of our big sponsors, and they put the book in their branches and went to B. Dalton. I don't even know if they're in existence anymore.
I don't think so, but you warmed my heart. Somebody actually used to go to bookstores.
That's right.
I appreciate that.
That's right. So the book, actually, the project made $60,000, which is peanuts today, but for a 22-year-old kid on his internship project,
that's not bad.
They kind of liked it, and they said, okay, we're going to hire you as assistant PR director. I worked with Merrill Swanson in my early years. That first year, as I said, went to the Super Bowl, and then kind of became director of communications, director of operations. My first big break was the famous game when we were going to Detroit in 1977, and we were riding, Bud Grant, our coach, had this thing where he wanted the team to arrive at the stadium 1 hour before the game. Now, 1 hour, most coaches are 3 hours, get there, sit in the locker room, kind of relax. But Bud had this thing where back when he was the coach, or when he played at the University of Minnesota under Bernie Bierman, they sat in the locker room for 3 hours, lost to Michigan, and he said, that's never going to happen if I'm a coach. And so he wanted to get to the stadium 1 hour before the game, which was murder on the traveling secretary person. At the time, it was Sherm Pinkham, and I'm in my second year. And so we're going to Detroit, and we get on the freeway. We don't have a police escort, and it's a little sleety storm, and we're in gridlock traffic. We don't get to the game until 1 o'clock for a 1:05 kickoff. And the NFL officials are waiting for us, and they say, Bud, you're going to get fined $10,000 and a 15-yard penalty on the kickoff. And the league office wants to talk to you. And Sherm Pinkham, unfortunately, got fired after that game.
Oh, man.
And they looked at me and they said, Jeff, take over. Take over the traveling secretary job. I said, okay. And I was already doing a lot of stuff at training camp with operations, so they thought I had a little bit of a skill set to do that. And so, of course, the next year in Detroit, I map out this very intricate route, going the side roads and not get on the freeway, get a police escort, allow 45 minutes for a 15-minute drive. And, of course, what do? We get there at 11:30 instead of noon when Bud wants to get there. We're getting off the bus, and Bud's looking at his watch, and he goes, we're a little early, Jeff. And so, but that was my first experience with the Bud Grant stare.
Wow.
But Bud's a great friend of mine.
Yeah, and I've heard from players and other people around the organization that Bud hardly ever raised his voice, maybe never raised his voice, but if he had to tell you something a second time, you might have to pack.
That's right. And I told him, we'll get it right next year, Coach, and we did.
It's funny, I'm working on a Sunday piece on Viking offensive coordinators and John DeFilippo and everything like that. I always feel like in this market, offensive coordinators are probably over-criticized. They're kind of blamed for everything. And you've had some really good ones, and I'm not sure many of them were appreciated. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that it's always a lightning rod position. And it seems like defensive coordinator, it's a little harder to pinpoint.
Yep.
Everybody thinks they can call plays.
Yep.
But people don't necessarily think they can call defenses and blitzes and all that. So, yeah, the offensive coordinator is definitely a lightning rod position, and I'm sure Brian Billick could tell you that when we see him this weekend. And because there was some criticism after that 98 game, as we talked about, in terms of what happened at the end of the first half, the play we mentioned, when Randall Cunningham was stripped and fumbled and Falcons scored, and instead of 20-7 at halftime, it was 20-14.
It changed everything.
Nail-biting time. So, yeah, I agree with you on that. So I think there's definitely a lot of pressure on John DeFilippo. I think that he's got Kevin Stefanski here with him, which I think is Kevin's a great young coach and is the quarterback coach for the Vikings. And so there's continuity there, which helps. And then, of course, the unfortunate passing of Tony Sperano kind of put the offensive line into a little bit of a change mode. And that offensive line we'll talk about later, but I'm still a little concerned, shall we say. I think everybody is. That could be, if there's any undoing on this team this year, that's where it could possibly happen, which I hope is not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris Carter, when he first came to Minnesota, at least the first few years he was here, I had a very good writer-player relationship with him. He would actually call me and text me stuff. When I couldn't text back then, I guess he called me. But he was very open with me. He kind of wanted somebody to be able to tell his story and how he was changing his life, and he was very good to me. Once I left the beat, I lost that relationship. I don't really have a relationship with Chris anymore. But I remember you and Chris having a great relationship. Has that continued?
Yes, we have, absolutely. I was at the Hall of Fame 2 years ago, whenever it was when he was inducted. And that was a great experience, and been close to he and his family for years and years, and I still stay in contact with Chris, and really happy for him with the work he's doing now at I guess it's FS1 or whatever it is, or all the things that he's involved with, and the charitable work that he does, and so I as I said, it was really a great experience to be at his Hall of Fame enshrinement 2-3 years ago, and he still is a great friend to this day, absolutely. And we had a good relationship. And one of the things that I always tried to do as a GM in Minnesota and as a team president in Tennessee, I always tried to have one player that was kind of my go-to guy that I could talk to, maybe go out to lunch in preseason with a preseason night game and sit down and say, okay, what's going on? What's going on with the team? What's the pulse of the team? And I didn't tell the coaches that I was doing that. It was just kind of my thing. And in Minnesota, it was Chris Carter, was my guy who I would talk to. And in Tennessee, it was Eddie George. And had a great relationship with both those guys. Coincidentally, Ohio State guys. Yeah. But I think that helped me have an understanding of what they were thinking about, and some of the things that we could do to support them and support the team, and just any thoughts they had. And I thought that was really valuable. And I think there's too many CEOs and GMs and presidents that just sit in their office and kind of try to sit in the ivory tower. I think that's a big mistake. It's one of the things I talk about when I speak to groups and speak to company CEOs. I said, I think you need to be a walk-around CEO. You need to be visible. You need to talk to the players. You need to talk to the coaches. You need to understand, I would eat dinner with the coaches. I would eat dinner with the players. I would attend practice every day for at least a half an hour, and so they knew I was there, that I was watching, and I think that was important. I think that helped me have a good relationship with those guys.
Let's talk about Denny Green. Fascinating character, had a lot of success here, ultimately frustrated by the championship game losses. How was your relationship with him? Did it evolve? Did it change? Did you end on a good terms?
Well, I would say it ended on a not so good terms. Yeah. It started on really good terms because when he first came in 1992, and I was part of that process where he was identified and as the future coach, and we were also talking to Pete Carroll at the time, a longtime friend of mine too, and I think that Denny knew that he needed me as an ally, and that we could work together to help build a roster, and I could help get guys that he and his coaches felt were important, and whether it was talking to Denny, to Tony Dungy, Foch Fazio later, Brian Billick, the coordinators, the position coaches. But I spent a lot of time with Denny, had a really good relationship with him, I would say up until the 98 season, and really through the 98 season until the end of that season, when the word started filtering out that Denny wanted to be the next Bill Walsh and wanted to take my job and wanted to be not only the coach, wanted to be the GM.
And the owner.
He wanted to do everything.
Yes.
And so it was unfortunate because, we didn't end on the best note. We never really had an argument about it. I knew what he was doing. He knew what he was doing. And I would see him once I had left the Vikings and went down to the Titans, which actually career-wise was the best move for me. It was a major promotion to be a team president instead of a GM, and yet I was still involved with the football side and the business side in Tennessee, and we had a great situation down there. I had a great coach in Jeff Fisher who had a great relationship with, and Floyd Reese was our GM, who I'd worked with here in Minnesota. You know Floyd, and so I think it was unfortunate, but I would see Denny in the years at the Combine or whatever when we played the Vikings, and we were cordial, but I was less than thrilled with what had happened, and he knew it, and that's the way it ended up, unfortunately.
Let's talk briefly about the Vikings and 49ers game. You obviously see the game in a different way than a lot of us. What do you see being key matchup? What are you going to be watching for?
Yeah, I think it's really an interesting matchup and an interesting opener, and I think when you look at the 49ers, I think the most important thing for the Vikings is it's a team that has a lot of confidence in their quarterback, in Jimmy Garoppolo. And he's 7-0 as a starter, which is well documented. So I think, obviously, we've got the Kirk Cousins story that hits his first game as a starter. But to me, the key to the ball game is they have got to pressure Jimmy Garoppolo. They have got to put the heat on him and also be able to protect Cousins. I think, coincidentally, those two, the two quarterbacks and how the game unfolds. And the 49ers have a very dangerous defensive line, too. Now, their back seven, not so great. Mm-hmm. And so I think you can expect maybe a lot of short stuff and try to keep that pressure off of Cousins, especially if the offensive line is in a little flux still for the Vikings. But I'm going to be watching the Vikings pass rush in this game. And one of the things that Bud Grant always taught me from day one, the two most important things, have a great quarterback and have a fourth quarter pass rush.
Yep.
And we had that in the Bud Grant era with the Purple People Eaters and Carl Eller, Alan Page, Jim Marshall, Gary Larson, that whole group. And then back in the 80s when you were covering with Keith Millard and Chris Dolman, all those great teams we had. And then the 98 season, John Randall and that crew. And so I'm going to be watching Everson Griffin. I'm going to be watching Danielle Hunter. I'll be watching Sheldon Richardson inside push and perhaps bar on some blitzes. And how do they pressure Garoppolo? I think, to me, the interesting part of this game, and it has a feel to me of when the Rams came here last November. Mm-hmm. And the Vikings pretty much dominated that game. They won 24-7. Jared Goff, hot young quarterback coming in. The Rams, I think, were 7-3 at the time and headed towards a division title. But young quarterback, first game in U.S. Bank Stadium with the Viking crowd and the noise, and I think it got him rattled. Vikings bottled up Todd Gurley in that game, held him to 37 yards. That was the key. I think the Vikings have to stop the 49er running game in this game because I think that Kyle Shanahan, the 49er coach, is going to try to protect Garoppolo with the run and with some short stuff. And so that's the interesting thing to me is what kind of pressure can Griffin and Hunter put on, which we didn't see a lot of pressure in that NFC Championship game last time we saw them. And that was one of the keys of that game, that Foles had so much time that he could throw deep. And I'm sure that you know that Shanahan's been looking at that game very carefully, and he saw that they were able to take some shots down the field with Jeffrey and some of their receivers, Aguilar for the Eagles, and ended up blowing the game open. Ertz made a big play. And so the key for the Vikings, don't give Garoppolo time to do those kind of throws. Don't let him get the ball downfield to Goodwin, who's a fast receiver. And so I think it's a different animal here at U.S. Bank Stadium with the noise factor. Everson Griffin was not healthy in that NFC Championship game. That was a big factor. And I think that the Eagles surprised the Vikings that day, honestly, by opening it up and throwing deep. They didn't expect that. And I think now Mike Zimmer's had a whole offseason to look at that game, and so has Kyle Shanahan. So anything could happen, and openers are always interesting in that regard because you just don't know what's going to happen. There's a fatigue factor that enters in because the players have not played full games yet. And there's nothing harder in football, as you know, than rushing the passer. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the nice advantages the Vikings have is they've got some good depth on that defensive line now with some of those young players. I'm talking about guys like Weatherly and some of the young players.
And I think Sheldon Richardson's ability to give an interior pass, I mean, as you saw, we always saw with John Randall, the interior pass rush messes up an offense more than anything else.
That's right. And I like some of their young players inside, and Jaleel Johnson and Jalen Holmes, a fourth-round pick out of Ohio State. I think those guys are going to have an important role in this game because of the fact that Richardson and Linval Joseph have not played a full game yet.
Right.
And so they're going to be rotating guys. And one of the things I know is Andre Patterson, one of the best defensive line coaches in the league, and he was here back when I was here. So he's been around a long time and does a great job. And so that's going to be fun to watch. And there's so many subplots to this game. Dalvin Cook's return, how much do they use him versus Latavius Murray. Cousins, of course, and how does he react to his opening game, and the spotlight and the pressure on him is immense. Yeah. And we know that because what are the expectations? The expectations are Super Bowl.
Right.
Because Case Keenum got him to the NFC Championship.
And won 13 games somehow.
That's right.
I'm still not sure how, but he did.
So I think it's going to be a fun game. 49er defensive line is dangerous. DeForest Buckner, former first-round pick, and Solomon. They've got some really good players up front, and that's going to be interesting to watch too.
I'm going to throw it to Jeff for we're going to save, I know Jeff and I think, could talk for hours, and we will end up talking for hours cumulatively, but we're going to save some of the stories. We're going to kind of, meet them out as we go forward here. I'm going to send it to Jeff for a final thought here on the first edition of Jeff Diamond's